Good morning. My name is Robert Reese. I'm here at the Denison Pequotsepos Nature Center, and we're going to learn about all sorts of weasels today. We have lots of different weasels in Connecticut, and the weasel family is really, really cool. So, now I'm no weasel expert exactly, so hopefully this isn't an otter disaster. Anywho, so in Connecticut, we have lots of different weasels, as I said. We have the river otter here, who's standing up and looking rather dapper. We have the mink over here. We have a fisher. You'll note that I didn't say fisher cat. It's just a fisher. And then we have another example of a river otter. Okay? Right there down in the front, bam, is a little short-tailed weasel. So now, weasels are a really, really interesting family of mammals. One of the things that weasels are famous for, they have slender bodies, they have furry tails, okay? So if you're looking at a rodent, also like a rat would have a slender body, but then it would have a scaly tail, right? So you can tell quickly that it's a weasel.
And Rob, what are you holding right now?
This is actually a mink. So ways you can identify.
Oh, here comes Rosie.
What you're looking at.
I know
Hello,
everyone
Rosie.
likes to see Rosie. So Rosie, for anyone that hasn't tuned in before, is our resident pigeon here at the Nature Center. All right, Megan's screen is frozen. Megan, I would try rebooting. That seems like it might be an issue with your computer on that side.
So this is a mink, and one of the things you can do is you can look when you're looking at pelts. You can look to see. You see how it has really shiny fur? So that tells you something about it. That tells you that the fur is oily. So if it's oily, that means it's at least semi-aquatic. We can see that again on the river otter. So a mink preferred habitat is actually like the rocks and along the shore, right? They like to.
Jessica said it looks soft. And would you say that that's also very soft?
Yeah, so this is soft and smooth, right?
And you can see that sheen there, and you're saying that is an indication of...
So they produce an oil from a gland, and they rub it on their fur, and that basically keeps their fur pretty much waterproof.
A little chuckle as you can see Rosie here was perching on the fisher, and again an indication of why she lives at the Nature Center, because she's not able to determine what might actually eat her.
Now, since we're on otters, otters have webbed feet to help them in the water. They're not sea otters. These are river otters. Okay, so they like fresh water in the maybe even estuaries, lakes, river streams, estuaries, things like that. And they have special nostrils. They can close their nose.
Rob, I'm going to get in real close so they can see the nostrils here.
Let me pick it.
And you said, and again, their feet?
Yeah, and their feet, like their hind feet, are webbed. The mink is similar, but slightly less webbed feet, right? So it swims, but not quite as agilely. A otter's tail is actually flat. You guys see that? Similar to a beaver. So you would call this the rudder. And so they actually use their tail to propel themselves almost as much as their feet. Okay? And then down the line here, the short-tailed weasel, we have another one called the long-tailed weasel in Connecticut. And this is supposed to be a long-tailed weasel pelt right here, but it seems a little big to me. So honestly, this might be a young fisher.
Ooh,
pelt.
Now, Rob, we have a question
you know.
from Louise who was asking, what
Sure.
was the last pelt that you just showed? And that was the otter, right?
This was the otter, yes, the river otter. Yep.
And that is the only species of otter that we have here in Connecticut.
Exactly, yeah. The sea otter is out west in Washington and that area, right? Let's see. So, but we have the short-tailed weasel here. So the short-tailed weasel is also called an ermine. And they'll, in the winter, I guess late fall, they'll molt, and their fur for the winter will be white. Except for the black tip to their tail. You guys see that?
Let's see if we can.
And so they're common.
Here, I'm going to go above so people can see that
They're
tail.
common, but
and see that dark
they're common
tip.
from about here north. They like wetlands. They like forest, right? So as soon as the trees go away, you won't find ermine anymore. Long-tailed weasel, right? They're common from about here south. So right here in this area is like their
northern range,
where both weasels exist. All right, so now fishers are sometimes blamed for things that they're not really responsible for. One of which is the screaming at night, right? Sometimes people say that they hear fisher cats and it's this awful child screaming or something like that, crying of children in the middle of the night, but that's actually not the fisher. The fisher makes actually kind of a soft noise, kind of sounds like a grunting, like a kind of noise. It's really not the that you hear the red fox making. So that's actually a red fox call, right? The other animal that makes a crazy screaming noise is a barn owl. They're pretty uncommon though. So if you take all those three animals, right? The most common animal is the red fox. The fisher, we have them for sure, but not a ton. Their preferred, thank you, Rosie. Their preferred prey is actually a porcupine. Weasels are really, really smart, right? And they're really, really quick and agile. So what they do is they figured out that they can roll over the porcupine and get at its belly. And so we don't have a ton of porcupine here either. So actually we don't have a huge amount of fishers. We have some though.
Now, we did have a question of someone who actually wanted to know where they can find fishers.
So go into dense forest and start heading slightly north maybe. They're more common in Massachusetts than they are here.
And we also have them in Rhode Island, which is where I hail from.
Yeah.
So that is a great question, Gabe.
Yeah.
All right.
And they're actually semi-arboreal. They'll climb trees. So, think thick forest. All right, so.
Oh, Kathy had a question. If fishers are the ones that go after cats.
Well, that's just it. So if you think about, it's just the chances, right? Think about the chances, right? So if other predators are more common, like the coyote and the fox, not that I'm saying that those are bad animals or anything like that, but if they're more common, and this is the relatively less common animal,
the likelihood is less.
Your chances are that it's going to be a different predator. They are, however, excellent predators. I have some skulls to show you. Here we go. This is a mink skull.
And again, we can
here.
show that in kind of alongside our mink here. Mm-hmm. And we'll try to get as close as we can so you guys can see those teeth.
This is most likely a marten. There's a really decent chance that mystery pelt here is actually a marten.
Oh, Rosie is knocking over our fisher.
Knock it off.
She's not the best assistant for videos.
And this is actually a wolverine. We don't have wolverines in Connecticut, but they are in the weasel family. So what I wanted to show you, though, is their teeth. So they have large canine teeth, but do you see how far forward they are? They're really, really far forward, right? And so that helps them grab their prey and make a powerful bite right away. And then they also have large molars.
Oh,
to help
Rosie is
crush,
very interested in what is going on.
to help crush their food. Right? Like Rosie.
Right. Only Rosie should have fear of this and just
so
not.
this is a wolverine, right? Yeah, exactly.
Instead, she's extra curious. Now, we did have a question, and hopefully you can answer this, Rob.
Yeah.
So, Cheryl and Emma noticed that you said fisher and not fisher cat.
Right. So the name of the animal is a fisher. There's no such thing as a fisher cat in terms of, the actual name of the animal. But the reason they've been misnamed fisher cat is actually because of this. You see how short the muzzle is, right? Like, and the teeth are far forward. Similar, right? Mm-hmm. If you look at a canine, see how the canine teeth are further back?
Oh.
And so then they have, sorry, it's hard to hold two and point at the same time, but, right? So if you look at both at the same time, the teeth are further back, and then you would have that muzzle, that nose, snout out here. So their faces are short like a cat's, but they're not cats. They're officially like related to ferrets and things like that.
Now, we have a question from Tiffany who would like to know if fishers can be darker in color, because she's noticing that our fisher over here is a bit more, not blonde, but blonder in color.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes fishers look dark. A lot of times the mounts are, kind of cleaned up, and things out in the wild will look considerably darker.
Oh, we have a couple people chiming in. So Amy is saying that they have fishers there in Hebron.
Yeah.
Sean would like to know, do fishers live in burrows near creeks and forests?
Yes. Yes and yes. All those things are true.
And Jolene would like a recap. Amy will be very impressed with this because she really enjoyed your interpretation of what a fisher sounds like. So if you could redo that for Jolene, that would be great.
I don't remember what I did, but I'm sure it sounded something like, I don't know. I really don't remember what I did. It's really just a soft grunting noise. And it's really not the screaming that
so many are familiar with. And that scream that everyone has heard so much about is actually more likely to be a red fox call. And for those that are like, I've seen the YouTube videos of a fisher cat scream, look very closely in those videos. You don't actually see the animal in the darkness. So that's why we know that you can impress family and friends when they talk about fisher cat screams, and let them know that that's actually a red fox. There's some great YouTube videos, and we'll share a link as well so that people can actually hear some of those crazy calls that foxes make that the poor fishers are blamed for. If we go back to the skulls, Susan has a question. Since a mink can fit through a 2-inch hole, what is the size of that skull?
That is about an inch.
So as you can see, it's appreciably smaller. Rob, would you put your hand out just for scale of reference?
So maybe.
Oh, yeah. Using something else.
Well, I just thought, that's my thumb. For example, it's only a little wider than my thumb.
Which is pretty small. Acadia has a question. How did we get the animals?
Well, the animals come here from different paths. Pretty much all of our mounts are donated. Every once in a while, we'll taxidermy something, but that's not very often.
And often those that we do taxidermy are victims of car strikes and other things like that.
Yeah. So, and most of these animals were actually, that was their end here. And actually we can see evidence of that. Like if you look closely at the mink.
Its face looks a little different than a mink would normally look like.
So that's an artistic rendering of a mink's face. But I think that's because of the damage that was done,
Which is actually pretty handy that you're over near the mink, because you would see these along coastal wetlands, right? Or is that something else? Because Wendy has a question of which weasel we'd be more likely to see along those coastal wetlands.
So you see minks there. Like I've seen minks down in think of estuaries like the Mystic River, like Bluff Point area. All those coastal rocks and estuaries. They like to catch like fish and crayfish and things like that.
In one of our staff field trips a couple of years ago, we were out on Mason's Island, and we all got to see a mink that was going along the rocks, which was pretty fun for all of us to see. We have a question from Louise of what is the difference between a weasel versus a fisher? She thought she had a fisher before, but maybe not in Massachusetts.
So I don't know what she had, right? But,
yeah.
But certainly a fisher is a type of weasel. So there's the weasel family, which includes all of these. They're actually named for the fact that they all have some sort of musk. So weasels produce a musk that has a really potent smell. If anybody's ever owned a ferret, they're familiar with that kind of smell, right? So all of these animals have that. Some of them use it to defend themselves. Others use it to like mark territory. They'll rub that land on trees and whatnot. So that's what they're named after. They're all very good predators, but for the most part, they're predators of squirrels and porcupines and mice.
And smaller creatures. Now, of these, because we had a couple people that have asked, and again, since we're covering the spectrum of the weasel family that are residing locally, are they nocturnal species? Especially someone would like to know specifically about the fisher.
So the fisher I would put at crepuscular. So
and that means active during the day?
So that means that they're active like early in the evening, right? And they're active early in the morning, but not necessarily completely nocturnal like an owl. And not necessarily active very often during the day, in the middle of the day.
So Cheryl and Emma would like to know if fishers ever attack people. Because I know they tend to get a bad reputation.
So they have a bad reputation, but I don't think so. And it's really not that big of an animal.
There have been a couple of news reports over the last few years, but those reports are very, very seldom, and often those are actually ending up being animals that have been tested for rabies or tested positive for rabies. So that's not in their normal behavior.
Right. So it's really a case of bad reputation, which is unfortunate because really they're very interesting animals. They have a lot of interesting adaptations. One of which, because they're crepuscular, right? Fishers have horizontal pupils.
I don't know if we'll be able...
I don't know that the mount has accurate eyes.
So maybe we'll try to post a picture so that people can see that as well.
Because when they taxidermy animals, they use glass eyes, So sometimes you can find mounts that have the wrong kind of eye in them, and most people wouldn't notice. But so they have horizontal pupils, and that helps them see in the low light, right? Other animals have horizontal pupils too, like sheep. And goats, I believe, have all horizontal pupils as well.
Susan thinks that Rosie is a great teaching assistant. She certainly adds a nice flair. She was actually over by this mount that is my right from the Fisher cat, and someone lost track of this one right here, Rob.
Yeah.
What is that creature right there?
So that is a mink. So you can tell a mink by the color and size, right? It's sort of in the middle in terms of the smallest and the largest, right? It's dark brown, but then it's got really shiny fur. And that's because it's semi-aquatic. It rubs that oil on its fur to essentially give itself protection from the water.
And as a recap, these ones would be more apt to be found along the coastline?
Yeah, and up into lakes as well, but for the most part, they're coastline. They like rocky shores, yeah. Now, if only Rosie would land on the mount that we're talking about to highlight it, like we could.
She almost did earlier. I know. She could be our Vanna White.
Otter.
So Carrie said that they saw something in their yard in stores that looked like the short-tailed weasel on the table, but much smaller, more like chipmunk size. After Googling it, they thought maybe it was a stoat. Do you know anything about stoat size and if they're in Connecticut?
They're not in Connecticut. I think they're European, like a Great Britain, Scotland. So I would put it at either a short-tailed weasel or a long-tailed weasel would be more likely.
They have ferrets at home and love the weasel family. We think weasels are pretty awesome too.
Yeah.
Kristen Murphy would like to know what of these change colors in the winter.
So the ermine does. So this is the short-tailed weasel. It's also called an ermine. And in the winter, it would be bright white. The only part that doesn't change is the black tip to its tail.
And again, we're going to zoom in.
Yeah, I picture this is a martin.
So Avery would like to know, age 8, if they make a dam.
So, no, they don't make a dam. They do make a den, D-E-N, right? But not a dam. So that would be the beaver. So a beaver is a type of rodent, and they have those chisel teeth, right, to fell the trees, right? So otters, instead, they make like a den burrow, and a lot of times they'll have at least one, sometimes more, entrances to the water, but they always have multiple entrances that they can access their burrow from. So they're very clever. So, you know, sometimes they'll come out one hole and play around, and then try to avoid by going into a different hole and then coming out behind them and doing all sorts of stuff like that. If you see otters, a lot of times the young are like playing with each other and rolling around and wrestling and stealing food from each other.
Nancy would like to know, is a marmot part of the weasel family? Here goes our assistant.
So a marmot is actually a rodent. That's similar to a chipmunk, but bigger. So a chipmunk, the Latin name for a chipmunk is marmotini, meaning small marmot. So interesting little factoid there.
Not a martini, marmotini. Got it. All right. Are fishers solitary, or do they live in groups?
They're basically solitary.
And Jessica would like to know how many babies they can have.
That's a good question. So ordinarily, I think it's in their babies, and only a few days later, breed again. But then they hold the DNA, right, for a long time, and then in the middle of winter, they self-inseminate essentially, and then they give birth again in the spring, like in April. So it's kind of interesting. So their gestation period is almost a year.
Wow.
So that's for the fisher.
And that is for the fisher cat that Rosie is next to. All right. Well, everyone, thank you for tuning in today. We appreciate you joining us. And at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, we are actually going to come to you from our Coogan Farm campus. So we are going to introduce our rooster and our Indian runner ducks that are residents in our giving garden. So tune in live tomorrow. And we look forward to seeing you then. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.